Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You have said so," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom of the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Did you want me to release you, the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do, then, with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led Jesus away in the palace and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
I'm so happy to be back here today to speak a little bit about Jesus before Pilate, as Easter is approaching. And Easter is one of my favorite seasons in the year, not just because of Jesus' death and resurrection, but also because in 2021, on a Good Friday, my wife was at St. Thomas giving birth to my daughter. So she was born in a Good Friday, so every time we approach Easter, I remember that moment. When I was a kid as well, I used to listen to all of the stories about Easter, Jesus suffering, Jesus dying, and I wouldn't really understand. And after we understand everything, after we understand what comes after that, everything changes in our mind. It looks like we've been blind before, and then our eyes open to a new reality. And last month, one of my friends asked me a question saying, if you buy a book, are you making a profit or it's an expense? Then I thought and I said, it's a profit because it's going to give me something back. And he said, no, that's an expense. And then he said, if you read the book, is that a profit or an expense? And I said, that's a profit because you're reading the book. He said, no, that's an expense. But if you read the book and put in practice what you have read and you understand everything, then that's a profit. And that made me think also about the Bible, because it's not just about reading it. We need to understand the real story, because the Old Testament doesn't make sense without the New Testament, and the New Testament doesn't make sense without the Old Testament. So everything's complete. And we're going to talk today about Jesus when he was brought before Pilate. When the high priest brought Jesus before Pilate to judge him, Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of Jews?" And Jesus answered him, "You have said so." And from this, I learned a bit from Jesus' silence and from Jesus' small words during his appearance before Pilate. Because when God calls us for something, we don't really need to say or to show people who we are or what we've been called to, because people, they're gonna see by your actions. You don't even have to say a word about who you are or what you do, because people gonna see that calling of God on you. So Pilate was mocking him. Are you the king of Jews? And he knew that all of those religious people, they envied Jesus because of who he was and for everything that he was doing. And we also see the example of David. David, when he was anointed as a king, God said to Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So God was referring to Saul. Saul was a king chosen by the people. He was very tall and strong. And David was a small guy. He didn't look like a warrior or someone that could be a king. And because of David's heart and all of his actions, people recognized him as a king. And he's been, until today, the best king of Israel. After that, in verse 3, the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring in against you. But Jesus made no further answer. And from this part, we learned from Jesus that we don't really need to answer to accusations. Because many times when God is preparing us for something, every time God gives us a job, or anybody else, even at your own work, or every time we're doing something good, sometimes people accuse you. Sometimes people, they come and say things about you that it's not true. And if we react, we're going to be spending energy on something that is going to take you away from focusing on what you really need to do. And I've learned through the Bible that from Jesus that we don't have to answer to accusations, because God is the one that always makes justice in our place. And then they started accusing Jesus. And then on the verse 9, Pilate asked the crowd that was there, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And then the high priest started to asking the crowd not to release Jesus, but Barabbas. Barabbas was a murderer that was there. He was being arrested because he was a rebel. He's been involved in a movement murdering people. So every feast, they used to release one prisoner. So Pilate gave the option to release Barabbas or Jesus. And the crowd started to ask them to release Barabbas. And sometimes we complain about many little things, like, oh, I was supposed to be promoted in the pastor's place. I've been unjustified. But Jesus was actually going to die in a place of a murderer. And then the crowd started to ask Pilate, release Barabbas, release Barabbas. And then Pilate asked the crowd again, what do you want me to do to this man then? And the crowd said, crucify him. And from this verse, we see that the things that happened to Jesus was unjust. He got arrested in a place of a murderer, and he was supposed to die in the place of a murderer. And I see some people that they said, I'm not ready to be a Christian because I still have so many things to sort out in my life. I'm not ready. Last month, I spoke to a guy, and he said, I'm not ready to follow Christ because I'm an homosexual. I have thoughts that it's not aligned with Christianity. And I started talking to him, and I said, nobody can get ready to follow Christ. Nobody can pay the price to follow Christ. Because Jesus, everything that he done, he did it for us. He did in our place. And then I see many, especially young people, thinking that, okay, I like Christianity. I like people, I respect people that are religious, but I'm going to live my life and maybe one day I'm going to become a Christian. And they think they need to be a saint to follow Christ. They think they need to be holy to become a religious person. And imagine a man come to this area and he comes inside this church and he start killing people. He start killing our brothers and sisters, our parents, our children. And then he goes away. And then a few months later, he come here and he become a pastor. That's the story of Paul in the Bible. So there's nothing that we do that can take us away from the love of God. And I remember when I was younger, when I was 20 years old, I was a party promoter. I used to party a lot. I started working in a nightclub, and I had a lot of friends. And one day, something happened in my life, and I got into depression. And I remember I was alone in my room. All I had was alcohol and cigarettes. And all of my friends that was with me at the nightclubs, at the party, they disappeared. Because many times when we go to the most difficult times, everyone disappears. And we can also see that there was the case with Jesus. Jesus was there. Everyone was calling, crucify him, but where was Jesus' friends? And sometimes your friends, they are close to you because they want to see the outcome, the results of what we're doing, but they're not there to support you. And as we see, like one day before, Jesus was with Pilate. Jesus was being judged by the religious people. And the Bible said that Peter was just on the yard waiting for Jesus. And Peter was there, okay, if Jesus comes, I'm going to be with him. But if he doesn't succeed, I'm going to be here just watching. And people came to him and said, oh, are you Jesus' friend? And he denied Jesus 3 times. I do not know that man. And sometimes when God has a purpose in our life, he just take away everyone that's close to you that shouldn't be there. And then I was alone in my room, and I had depression. I was living in Oxford. My parents and my family was living in London at the time. And I remembered everything that I learned in the church, the story of Jesus Christ that have died for our sins. And there was a moment that I had a bit of hope, and I decided to move to London. 1 week later, I packed my stuff and I moved to London. I started going to the church. And then from there, God gave me a new life, new friends. And you do not have to worry when you go through difficult times and you see all of your friends disappearing. Sometimes they are not ready to follow you on the next season of your life. Sometimes they have to live so that you can accomplish what God has for you. And as a human being, many times we just focus on the wrong things, on the bad things. And for many times, when I started going to church, I was focusing on the bad things that I used to do. And then I still had the mind like, I need to be perfect to follow Jesus. I need to do good to follow Jesus. I need to be a good man to follow Jesus. And every time I was getting disappointed because I couldn't be the person I thought I had to be to follow Jesus. And since the Garden of Eden, the Bible is going to say in Genesis chapter 2 that God has planted in the middle of the garden 2 trees. One was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The other one was the tree of life. And Adam and Eve, they were in the garden, but they would focus only on the thing they shouldn't do, and they would ignore the tree of life. I mean, if the tree of life is there, all you have to do is eat from that tree so you can have eternal life. But they were so focused on what they couldn't do that they ended up eating from the tree they shouldn't. And many times it's us in our lives. We focus a lot on the bad things, on what we shouldn't be doing, and we forgot that Jesus is there. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And sometimes we're so focused on, I need to be good, I need to do good, and we forgot that actually all you have to do is to try what Jesus has for you. And once we understand that, everything in our life gets better. I don't know if you guys have done the Christian tour with Pastor Ben. Pastor Ben, I think you guys know him from the other church, Victoria Park Community Church. Yeah, he does a Christian tour, which is really nice, with the story of the old Christian people in London. And I've been to one of his tours, and we've learned about, we came to this church, it's a small church in Bank, and I learned the story of a guy called John Newton. John Newton, he was a slave trader. He used to be a captain of slave ships. And in one of his ships' travel, his ship started sinking. And he wasn't a Christian, but his mother was, and his mother used to pray for him. And everyone was sinking with the ship at the time, and he started to make a prayer. And he said, God, if you save me from this death, I'm going to serve you, and I'm going to spend my life serving you. And at the end, he got saved. His body ended up in an island close by. And once he came back to London, he started serving God at the point that he became a pastor in a church. And one of the members of his church is a man called William Wilberforce. He was a politician. So he started teaching this man. He was teaching everything about God, about the Bible, about grace, about the love of God. And this man was the man that abolished slavery in UK. And it was sent, the message was sent to all of the world, and little by little the slavery started to stop in all of the world. And one day, John Newton was sitting down, remembering everything that he's gone through his life, everything that God has done through his life. And he got a pen and a paper, and he started to writing down these words: Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And it's now the song that people most sung in the whole world. And it was written by this man. A man that used to be a slave trader, and that God used him to stop the slavery. And it doesn't matter what you're going through or the bad times that you go through, God is going to use that for the good of those that needs help. And as I said last time, when I converted, I started doing events for young Christians. And I remember that when I used to do events in nightclubs, and I used to see like all of those people getting drunk, then having a shameful end of the night, and people using drugs. I have a friend that ended up in a hospice because he smoked so much weed that his brain like just stopped working properly. And then after I got converted, I started doing these Christian events, and I saw like young people giving their lives to Christ, people that left the life of using drugs and alcohol, and everything that is because of Jesus, is because of what Jesus has been through. And after that, the last few verses that we've read, it says that they have mocked him until his death. They have hit his head. They have treated him like nobody deserved to be treated. And that was all because of us. He died in the place of a murderer. He died in our place. And he died because of our sins. And we also can see after his death, you might gonna hear this message last Sunday, that the first person to enter heaven with him was a thief. And there's nothing we can do to deserve. There's nothing that we can do to pay what he's done for us. And Isaiah 53, chapter 3 to 5 says, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wound we are healed." So the message today is not just about suffering, it's not about mockery, but it's about healing. It's about peace, because everything that happened there was so that we can have salvation today. So this is the message for you today. And I hope God has spoken to your hearts. Thank you.